Attention everybody, the views and opinions expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and supported ministries and or nonprofits. You're on.
And thanks, Producer Matt, and welcome to Crime Time. This is Crime Time podcast episode 45. I'm Dr. Steve Albrecht. I'm joining you from the Acts Media Group studios in Springfield, Missouri. So hope everybody's having a good night, good day. For this hour, I'll be talking about a tough subject, suicides in general, and police suicides in particular. There's some things that we need to know about suicides as a topic, and specifically what is happening with our cops in this country. Some people do not realize this, and when I say it, they're always shocked. More cops are killed by their own hand than are killed in line of duty. Probably about 115 to 120 cops are killed each year. Half of those are killed in car accidents and motorcycle accidents and other types of accidents, and the other half are killed by crooks, usually with guns. But about 125 to 150 to sometimes to 180 cops kill themselves each year, year after year after year. And so we'll talk about why that exists for the police culture. We'll also talk about suicides in general, and this is disturbing to me if we look at some statistics that have come out of the National Institute of Health about suicidality in our world now, white males. Suicides tend to be the rising cause of death now, 31,000 suicides per year by typically males, in their 40s to 50s to 60s to 70s. And the choice for the suicide obviously is the gun. So we'll talk about guns and how it relates to suicide, how it relates to suicidality. I've got some hotline telephone numbers for people that we may need to keep stored in our lives and in our phones about police suicide and regular suicide to help out people that are in pain. And depression is an obvious connection to suicide. We see in the pandemic era now that lots of folks are home and depressed and not feeling all that great. And so we'll talk about some ways to get some help, including at work, maybe through your spiritual counselor at your church, maybe through employee assistance program. So we'll talk about suicide. So there's always a obvious connection between gun ownership and the likelihood of suicide. It's a real cause and effect issue. I'm a gun owner. I'm a gun book author. I've written 3 books on guns, which you can get at Amazon Kindle. Albrecht on Guns, Volume 1, Albrecht and Farrow on Guns, Volume 2, and Albrecht on Guns, Volume 3. So those are Kindle books. So I'm a gun guy. I have a lot to say about these issues today. Not only are we seeing more suicidality in our culture based on what's going on with the riots and the protests and things like that, we're also seeing way more background checks related to gun ownership in this country. So we had 3.9 million background checks for guns, and that's up 38% from 2020. 3.7 million gun background checks in March, and 19 million gun background checks from the FBI in the first 6 months of 2020. So to put that in perspective, we had 19 million in the first 6 months of 2020. We had 19 million total in the year 2012. So people are really into buying guns based on what's going on in the world in terms of wanting to protect themselves. More guns means the need for more responsibility, keeping them locked up safe, keeping them away from kids, keeping them away from people who are suicidal. We will talk about all that stuff. So police suicides is one of those shadow topics that few people outside law enforcement talk about or know anything about. Most people in law enforcement don't want to talk about it. My function, especially as a police trainer, is to get cops to reach out for the resources that exist for them: employee assistance program, police peer support teams, psychological services, which they oftentimes don't want to do until there is an issue in their life where they're right up against the edge of suicidality. So thanks for listening to Crime Time, where we talk about crime and crooks and cops and personal security. Talk about some dangerous people and lots of heroes in our world. We'll even mention a few stupid crooks. We will most importantly talk about what you can do to keep yourself and your family safe from crime and violence. As always, you need to be vigilant at home, in your neighborhood, and in your community, at school and at work and on the road. This show exists to make you feel more empowered, more secure, more educated on safety and security issues and the criminal justice system in general. As background, I worked for the San Diego Police Department for 15 years as a patrol officer, a reserve sergeant, and a domestic violence investigator. I now work as a training consultant, and I teach training workshops, webinars, live and online programs on HR issues, employee coaching, My main subject area is workplace violence prevention and security issues in the workplace. One of my specialty areas is libraries. I've written 23 books on business and workplace violence topics, police subjects, and guns, all of which you can find on Amazon. My 3 gun books are available on Amazon Kindle. You can always get me at my website, which is crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as Dr. Steve Albrecht, and you can follow me on Twitter. I'm a big Twitter guy at Dr. Steve Albrecht. You can find past episodes of the show on SoundCloud, and you can find new episodes each week after we post them on the Axe Media YouTube channel. So let's talk about suicide in general and police suicide particularly. There is a cover-up on police suicides, which is disturbing to me. I have seen reports where an officer killed himself in the locker room of the police station, and the report will say something ridiculous like, well, the gun fell from his shelf in his locker and discharged into his head as he was sitting there. Ridiculous things like that we cover up. We hear things like the chief of police was cleaning his gun at home when the gun went off and he died at the scene, when in reality we know the chief killed himself. We hate to denigrate people's sort of personalities and issues and problems with this specter of suicide. We come up with sort of creative ways to act like that they did not take their own life. And there's a lot of myths, especially that cops believe about suicide, and there's a lot of myths that the public believes as well. So if we have 150 people dying each year as a result of the depression and the PTSD and the trauma and the personal life issues that have affected them to the point where, as cops, they can no longer continue, that's a problem. If we look at 150 souls on an airplane that crash into the ocean, and that happened every Christmas Eve, there'd be a national investigation. We would try to say, what is going on with these airplane crashes where 150 people are dying every Christmas Eve? In retrospect, 150 cops kill themselves each year. People either say nothing or they go, yeah, it's a tough job, it's a stressful job, or we sweep it under the rug and we don't talk about it. So for here, I want to talk about this subject and get us kind of focused on what we can do about it. The police culture is connected, obviously, to gun possession. And constant gun possession is an issue in law enforcement that we have to think about. There are always guns either nearby or on a police officer's body, something, a gun, kind of firearm, within 10 feet of them at all times. This matters. This is important. When I talk to people who have had suicides in their family, one of the things they missed as sort of the warning signs is, we left the guns available because we were afraid to take them away from this person. We'll talk about what that means in the real world and how that works. And the idea that a gun is a harmless device, it's like a hammer, it's a tool, until somebody decides to use it and use it in the wrong way on themselves. There's lots of things that usually went on before that happened. There is a sad and undeniable connection between suicide and guns. It's the device of choice for many people, especially males. There's a weird sort of psychological issue. Women tend not to use firearms as their method of choice for suicide because they don't like to disfigure themselves. They tend to use pills as one of their first choices, or hanging, things like that, as their suicide type. But for guys, it's oftentimes guns. I want to talk about this subject because it needs to stay in the light and not in the shadows. And many suicidal people who think about taking their life or attempt it or succeed were driven by a combination of depression, substance abuse, typically alcohol use, and a lot of life events that they thought they could not fix. And in reality, we can fix a lot of life events. Almost anything can be fixed with time and attention and focus and therapy and people around them who care. One of the issues about suicide is that some people warn, and as a result, when they make those types of warnings that I'm thinking about hurting myself, or thinking about taking my life, or thinking about killing myself, as a society, as a community, as a culture, we can intervene in those situations with family support, pastoral support, mental health services, counseling, even putting people into mental health facilities until they can get stabilized. The problem with cops when it comes to suicide threats is they don't warn. They don't tell people what they're going to do, and this makes it difficult. When we think about depression, the depressed person feels that life is hopeless and that they would be better off not in life, and that people would not have to be around them when they're depressed, and that they're a burden on their families. When we hear about these things, especially from a clinical perspective, we can get people help and treatment, medication, psychotropic medications, therapy, and really get them saved and rescued and refocused. For cops who don't say anything, oftentimes these things come as a complete surprise to folks. I see examples in this country where officers have killed themselves at their police station, in the locker room. They've killed themselves in their cop cars, in their patrol cars, in their detective cars, right in the parking lot of the police station. I remember a horrible story I heard about NYPD, which has had a fair amount of suicides this year, where an officer went to go to the bathroom. He was eating dinner with his partner. It was during Christmas time. Comes back from, it was in some bar or some bar restaurant where they had food, and the guy comes back from the bathroom and the officer had killed himself at the table. I mean, what a horrible thing to happen. What a horrible thing to do to your partner. So when you think about police suicide, oftentimes these cops are so caught up in what is going on in their personal life, the depression, the substance abuse, typically alcohol is a big part of it, that they don't realize the impact on the rest of the world. They think that the world would be better without them. They oftentimes misunderstand or misjudge how their family would perceive these situations. And imagine having to process a crime scene involving somebody that you just saw 15 minutes ago, who's one of your colleagues, your friends, your coworkers, somebody that you care about who shoots themselves. It's really quite selfish when you think about it. So I'm not going to talk about assisted suicide or medically assisted suicide at the end of life, or people who have terminal illnesses who kill themselves. I mean, that's their choice. I'm talking about people who do it, especially with firearms, and especially cops who do it, and what the impact is on their families and the communities. I think sometimes they just don't think that far forward. Think about people that we have heard about, especially celebrities who have killed themselves for various issues. Comedian Robin Williams had a severe neurological disease that he knew was going to get much worse and was going to really affect his life and the quality of his life. He said he didn't want to be a burden to his family. He committed suicide. I mean, I disagree with the approach to suicide, but I understand when people are in pain and feel like their quality of life is not going forward, that they do it. I understand it. I don't always agree with it. I think there should be medically supervised programs where, palliative care, like we do with cancer patients, where people can live the rest of their lives in comfort, relatively speaking, without having to go through some disfiguring issue with guns or hanging themselves, and somebody in their house has to find them, which is horrible. So I'm talking about people who really feel they have no solutions to their life problems, and suicide is a welcome relief for their misery. At least that's their perspective. But guess what? It wasn't a welcome relief, and it isn't for the survivors who have to carry on. And one of the things that I think that people who commit suicide don't realize, and maybe they get this because of their family history, is there is a family history, a connection to suicide. And there are lots of stories, and I'll tell a few, where people who have committed suicide have family where an uncle or a father or a mother have done it, and it's sort of passed on to the generations, and then we look and find out that one of their children does it later on in life. And that's really horrible sort of legacy that gets set by this concept of, well, it becomes a solution to my life issues rather than something I should never think about. So we'll talk about, how guns are kind of the suicide device of choice for males, especially. Women tend to kill themselves less often with guns, again because of the disfiguring part of it, but men don't usually have such qualms. So people commit suicide, especially males, with handguns most often, then shotguns and rifles. Not to sound too grisly about it, but the shorter the barrel, the easier it is to pull the trigger. So short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns tend to be the things that people have used. When I was a cop, I saw people who'd kill themselves with handguns, shotguns, and rifles. It was never anything but a horrible sight. The idea that in TV or movies there's sort of a fake wound that gets created by a small little entrance wound and an exit wound, just sort of passes through and it's about the size of a dime. That doesn't happen. In real life, bodies don't respond to bullets so cleanly, and suicide, no matter how the person does it, is a crime scene mess. And it is a crime scene, something we have to investigate to find out that this is actually how it happened instead of being a homicide in disguise. I say all this because I've known people who have committed suicide. They weren't close friends, but I knew them because they were cops in my police department. And the undeniable fact that each year more law enforcement officers kill themselves than are killed by crooks in the line of duty. And it's just a painful reality for me to consider. If you think about the police officers, sheriff's deputies, troopers, special agents who die in the line of duty, that number is usually, around 60 to 65, and then the other half of those tends to be from accidents. And when you think about cops, they die in car crashes and motorcycle and plane and helicopter accidents. they're moving too fast for the conditions they're in, perhaps they're not wearing a seatbelt. This was a sort of common thing in my time in the police department when I first started, which was seatbelts. Those I'm not. I need to have control of the car. I'm not going to wear a seatbelt. And then, of course, once my daughter was born, and I said, well, I don't want to go through the windshield in a crash. I'm going to start wearing my seatbelt. And now, I think we have pretty much total compliance by cops and patrol cars wearing seatbelts. I hope so. But when you think about cops get hit by cars standing on the side of the highway, they get hit by drunk drivers driving on the wrong side of the road. There's lots of ways that they can die in accidents. But to think about how that they die in violent crimes where they're assaulted by crooks, usually with guns, that seems to be a number which is around 50 to 60 cops per year. But then we look and say somewhere between 125 to 150, sometimes in certain years 180 cops who kill themselves. So if you look at seatbelts with cops and cop cars, that's kind of a built-in. And in my day, wearing a vest was not always something that every cop did either. So now we have most officers around the country wear ballistic vests as part of their patrol uniform, and most of them use their seatbelts. And so if we thought about all the cops that we could get to wear their vests and to wear their seatbelts, we would probably drive the number of cops who were killed down a little bit. But this idea of cops killing themselves by their own hand, has been going on for decades, and this always disturbs me. It's a shadow issue. It's one that a lot of cops deny and dismiss, and they don't feel comfortable talking about it with their families, especially, or even their peers. And the reason for this is because they could get put on what's called the rubber gun squad. And the rubber gun squad is, you'll take my gun away, you'll make me sit in a station house or in some building where I just answer the phone and I feel like a secretary or administrative assistant. I'm not a real cop anymore. That's not going to happen. I'm going to not tell anybody what's going on in my personal and professional life in terms of the stressors that I'm facing until it gets really bad. And then oftentimes later on, after the person does commit suicide, we say, well, we saw some warning signs and we just didn't really know what to do. And what I try to teach people in my programs and talk to cops about all the time is you need to have the courage, with a capital C, if you have a partner officer, if you have a colleague, if you have a friend, to say, look, I can something's going on with you. You're hurting. We got resources. You shouldn't be afraid to reach out to me. I can help you in a confidential, supportive way. We can get you some help. We're going to save your life first. Then we're going to think about your career. And that's the important part with cops. They're always so connected to their careers that they don't want to put them at risk. They miss the opportunities, that the help and the support that they can get. So this idea of cops killing themselves, and then we see a local news story that says the officer's death was, kind of being investigated as died while cleaning his gun. Even if you don't know anything about the police culture, you can guess that this is a bogus reason. Cops have been using their guns and carrying them for years, up including 10, 20, 30 years. And so the idea that they shot themselves while cleaning the gun is ridiculous. The idea that they shot themselves in an accidental discharge is ridiculous. This is a soft sell the local media does sometimes to lessen the impact of the event on the community or the department or this person's family, so that there's some sort of sense of dignity about what happened, and when in reality they shot themselves. In recent years, this trend has changed, and has changed for the better. The news media now tells it like it is. They say this cop was found dead at home, or parked in a parking lot, or in the woods, or at a station, or her station, in the locker room, or in a patrol car, dead by a gunshot wound. The official cause is suicide, not some misdirected or misnamed cleaning accident. That's ridiculous. I think we have to call things what they are, which is this person took their own life, and we need to figure out what this means in terms of stopping other people from having this happen. For an example, in the California Highway Patrol, they created a program after a number of suicides called Not One More. And Not One More was a training program, and to their credit, the entire CHP bureaucracy said, we are going to train every single sworn and non-sworn, field traffic officer and people that work administrative and investigative and non-sworn civilian positions. Everybody's going to go through this suicide prevention training, and that's what they did. These types of things require a movement by the leadership of that police department to say, we're going to address this. It's not a shadow issue. I always talk about we should put posters in the break room. We should talk about this in lineups and roll calls about suicide as a police issue. It's connected to this job. Lots of other professions have suicides as well. Psychiatrists kill themselves, medical doctors get depressed and kill themselves, people in the nursing field. Lots of folks kill themselves all year long. But when we think about cops, it's just so connected to that culture. It's just so connected to what they do. So I'm always big on telling the truth and also giving people that are hurting in this type of environment the kind of support that they need. If you think about the law enforcement piece of it in suicide, there is a obvious connection to what's happening with us in our military. And our military veterans are dying by suicide, depending on what numbers you read. And I got some numbers from the Department of Veteran Affairs at about 20 veterans per day. And this is just a disturbing number. It's more disturbing to me in terms of the number of people who kill themselves who are veterans compared to cops, because the numbers are just way higher. If we take 150 police suicides per year compared to 7,300 veterans per year, the total suicide problem with police is 2% of the total number of vets who commit suicide. And not surprisingly, the reasons that police officers and veterans commit suicide are very common. Exposure to traumatic violence and combat, life-threatening situations where they're in fear of death. That's a driver for PTSD and post-traumatic stress disorder. Certainly depression is in both cultures, in both works. Alcohol or pain pill abuse is certainly connected to law enforcement and veterans. Pain mismanagement by physicians or psychiatrists, and depression mismanagement by mental health clinicians who miss some of the warning signs, because not every veteran or every cop sort of, will tell them what's going on, and oftentimes they miss some of the warning signs. The guilt over the death of a partner or somebody in combat, the guilt over some situation that they were involved in as a cop or as a veteran. Having to kill another human being, even if it was legally required and legally, ethically acceptable. Feeling helpless and hopeless in their life. Feeling career harm as a veteran, or feeling career harm is possible for them as a cop if they ask for mental health help. I mean, I've talked to lots of veterans who have got really, really good care from the VA. Sorry. And I've talked to lots of veterans who got not so great care from the VA, and it's all across the board. And I've talked to cops who went through the same thing and said, I got really great care from the Employee Assistance Program, and really great care from my community mental health resources, and others not so much. And so having this courage with a capital C, whether you're a veteran or a police officer, to get mental health help to save your life first and your career second is important. And the parallels between cops and veterans are certainly there in both groups. So you think about suicidality with cops and guns, the proximity issue is just so critical there. Cops use their duty guns, on their belt all the time, and they use their home guns that they keep, and obviously whatever guns they have that the department gave them, they will have 5 to 25 more of them at home, and they use their home guns to kill themselves or the department guns. Few professions outside the military mandate the carrying of a gun all day for work, and then off-duty cops carry their guns all the time as well. For them, their guns are tools, they're life-saving devices, but they're also part of their identity. And we think about what cops say. We are the biggest armed gang in town. We're the biggest armed group in town. We wear our gold and silver badges and our uniform colors proudly, and we wear our guns outside our pants, unlike crooks who hide them. So there's a kind of a connection to firearms and law enforcement that's only going back about, a couple hundred years. So cops have some wrong ideas about committing suicide, some very wrong ideas. And I'm going to think about and talk about some of the things that they believe, they think about themselves before they do it, as if it somehow was an acceptable solution. So one of the first sort of myths about police suicide is, I'll get a burial with full honors. There'll be bagpipes, and we'll have the flag-covered coffin, and the governor or the mayor, everybody will be there, the whole thing. And the answer is no, that doesn't happen. Why? Because most chiefs, and I think this is correct, most chiefs don't want to glorify the act of a police suicide, of a cop killing himself or herself. So they don't authorize the big funeral, and they don't tell other cops to show up in their dress uniforms and wear black bands over their badges. And oftentimes the family must bear the burden, and sometimes even the expense, of a funeral on their own, because the chiefs have said, we're not glorifying police suicide by giving them a full honors burial. And I agree with that perspective, having been to suicides involving police officers, where it feels strange to talk about what happened with this person with the bagpipes and the flags and the ceremonial, honor guard and things like that when they did not have to kill themselves. They did not have to put themselves in this situation. Second one where I think cops have the wrong idea about suicide is my family will get some sort of huge life insurance settlement. They'll be set for life. I'll be worth more to them dead than I am alive. Again, no. Most city and county life insurance policies for city police or county sheriffs don't pay out on suicides. The best the family can hope for is some sort of flat payout from the state's workers' compensation fund, not a payout for a suicide. So when you think about life insurance policies, oftentimes that is not built into, suicide is not built into the payoff, so there's no huge payoff. Sometimes cops will say things like, my family and my friends will understand why I had to do it. No, they won't. And even more, they'll hate you for it. They'll hate you for the rest of their lives, because when you think about people who die and leave a suicide note, sometimes it explains why they did it. Sometimes it explains why they didn't do it. Sometimes the note is horrible. And one of my colleagues in San Diego PD named Rick Carlson wrote a book, kind of a grisly book about suicide notes. Put Rick Carlson, Carlson, into Google Books and look for his book about suicidality if you're interested in that. He has a whole collection of suicide notes. Rick was a long-time San Diego PD homicide detective and really went to so many of those cases. So the note this person leaves maybe sometimes is really angry towards other people in the family. Sometimes the note is not explaining what's going on. Sometimes it does. These notes apologize or they give the reasons. Other times they're horrifically mean, filled with accusations and paybacks and revenge for a life that they felt was made miserable by a family member or a spouse. Imagine reading one of these notes that says, you made me do this. So this idea of the family will understand what happened is usually wrong. Most of the time people are miserable as to what happened. They never forgive the person that did this. Imagine carrying that around for the rest of your days, that this person who killed themselves thought you were the reason for it. People who don't know you will think that you're mentally ill or weak-willed or crazy, and people who do know you will ask why you did not reach out for help, ask why you didn't ask them for help. So the idea of suicidality in families is just so common. You think to yourself, this stops with me. My suicide won't cause other suicides in my family. Well, it does, and it just might. The novelist Ernest Hemingway was born in 1900. He blew the top of his head off with a double-barreled shotgun in 1961 at his house in Ketchum, Idaho. Got up, had breakfast, shot himself to death. His father had killed himself with his own father's, Hemingway's grandfather's handgun in 1928. Ernest Hemingway's sister, Ursula, took her life with a pill overdose in 1966 after he had been dead for 5 years. His brother, Leicester, killed himself with a borrowed handgun in 1982. And Leicester was 13 at the time that Hemingway's father killed himself and discovered his father's body. So think about all the suicides in the Hemingway family. His granddaughter is the actress Margot Hemingway, and she took an intentional overdose of pills and died as well. So there's about 5 people in Hemingway's family who killed themselves. In the denial that often accompanies these tragedies, Hemingway's fourth wife, Mary, issued a statement on the day of his suicide, which said, quote, Mr. Hemingway accidentally killed himself while cleaning a gun this morning at 7:30 a.m. No time has been set for the funeral services, which will be private. So her husband shoots himself to death, and she comes back with the usual thing that people do to try to sort of cover up, which is this was an accident. Hemingway had once written a letter to his mother-in-law, Mary Pfeiffer, where he referenced his father's suicide and said, I'll probably go the same way. I mean, he foreshadowed his own suicide. Suicidality runs across generations and families. And is there a genetic component to this? Who knows? Is it learned behavior? Definitely. Most studies suggest that a lot of factors weigh in on the person's decision to, quote, follow in the footsteps of other relatives who have made that final wrong choice. So let's get back to people who carry guns with a concealed weapons permit, like me and other folks who listen to me. There are a lot of people that have CCW permits, concealed carry permits, or your state allows concealed carry, and so you have a gun on your hip or under your armpit or on your ankle or in your car or somewhere close to you all the time, and it becomes a habit. So we protect ourselves. We want to protect ourselves as good concealed carry folks following the Second Amendment. We take training. We practice all the time. We become comfortable with the idea of carrying a gun safely so that other people can't get access to it, including kids, obviously. It's stored safely, all those things that are very important. But what happens is sometimes people, kind of like with cops in the military who carry guns as part of their work, people get sort of comfortable around guns and they take them for granted. Well, we should never stop realizing that we're carrying a gun. I mean, even the most comfortable holster I have still digs into my potbelly and reminds me that it's there all the time, and the only time I get relief is when I take it off at home. For cops, the instrument that they choose for their death is never more than 2 feet away, almost 24/7. It's a duty gun, it's a backup gun, it's a gun that they have the house to protect themselves and their family, etc. Well, lots of people who carry concealed also have ready and regular access to guns. Suicide by firearm would be less likely and, of course, more difficult if you didn't actually own a gun. But people figure out ways to kill themselves with guns they don't own. And there's a weird sort of a trend that I have seen in certain cities where younger people, 18, 19, 20, 21, and I saw this when I was still living in San Diego, will go to a shooting range and rent a gun, get targets, put on the headphones, step up to the range booth there in their lane and shoot themselves. It's very strange that they would go to a gun range, rent a gun, and kill themselves in front of the startled staff and the other people that are using the range. It's really quite selfish behavior. So they couldn't get access to a gun. They didn't own one, didn't want to buy one, so they went to a place, rented one, and used it to kill themselves. These stories abound on the internet, and they're always very disturbing and shocking to me. So having access to guns and kind of mixing in the noted reasons why we talked about, civilians, active duty service members, retired veterans, cops who kill themselves, it's much more likely that the gun is going to be the device of choice if it's around. So what's this all mean to us? I'm not saying don't carry your gun. What I am saying is that if you feel suicidal, if you feel like you want to take your life, or you know people in your life who are gun carriers, gun owners, who are also feeling suicidal, you have to have the courage to move your guns to a gun safe, move your guns to give them to somebody else, or be willing to intervene in the lives of those people that you're worried about who are gun owners and say, I need to take ownership of your guns while we get you some help. You can imagine how difficult and challenging this conversation is with somebody that you care about who's a gun owner, who may be in denial that they're going to ever do something harmful, but you say, you know what, we'll have this conversation after your guns are safe and secure. What about yourself? Well, you have to have, as a responsible gun owner, you have to have the internal strength to realize when your personal and professional problems are so severe that suicide even crosses your mind. You have to get immediate mental help, like right now, today, not tomorrow, immediate mental health, usually with some support from somebody who loves and cares about you, can get you some mental health help so that you don't put your life at risk and you don't create that type of scenario that we've been talking about, which is ruins generations coming on down the line because of suicidality. And the second thing is you have to allow someone that you love and care about to take custody of all your guns, everything that you have, until he or she agrees that you have been stabilized. And it's not your decision to decide that you're better. It is the medical doctor's decision, or a psychiatrist or a counselor or a therapist decision that you're stabilized before your family agrees and returns the guns back to you. Of course, not everybody who owns guns is suicidal. Not everybody who owns guns commits suicide. But the number of opportunities for people to kill themselves go up dramatically the more access to guns that they have, and this is just obvious. A couple stories here. A friend of mine was carrying his 9mm on his hip. He's on a short vacation with his wife. They had been having some marital problems. The trip didn't go well, a lot of frustrating arguments and bad feelings on the drive back. They were a few hours from home. They stopped at a restaurant to eat. They'd argued in the car before they walked in. His wife started to go inside the restaurant, even though they were both in tears. The husband stopped, let her go inside the restaurant, walked back to the car. He sat in the car for a moment while she was inside and thought about his gun. For a brief moment, thought about shooting himself. He had never been suicidal before, had never even entertained the idea, but in the stress of that moment where he felt like his marriage was over, he considered it. A wave of anger and guilt and shame washed over him, and he sort of snapped back to reality and realized that would have been a foolish idea. He took off his gun, unloaded it, put it in the trunk, locked his car, went inside, and asked his wife to leave the restaurant. They talked. She drove home. They talked all the way home with no tears and screaming, and figured out that they needed some heavy-duty counseling and that he needed some heavy-duty counseling. They're still married today. He's never had a suicidal thought again, but he told me in that moment when he was armed, he thought about killing himself. And it frightened him to see how easy it was possible to take that fatal, irreversible step in a moment of rage and in an idea of anxiety and helplessness and hopelessness that you would ever do that. So think about yourself. Have you ever had such a crisis in your life or just a horrible day where you say, boy, I wish I could just push the easy button and reset certain parts of my life and start over? Have you ever had such a horrible experience in some situation where you go, boy, I just wish I could snap my fingers and this would be all over with and all this pain would be gone? Well, people that are suicidal have that sort of perspective. I'm going to do something which will relieve all my pain, not realizing it just makes things, way worse for everybody else who survives and doesn't solve their problems anyway. So life is not easy, and getting mental health help is not easy, especially for prideful males, and there's never a reason even that you can think of that your grieving survivors will ever agree with that you should have killed yourself, that it's okay to do it. So perhaps after hearing the story of my friend, you say, I have good self-control. I would never hurt myself, or I'd never hurt someone I loved or care about. I would never decide I kill myself in a moment, in the kind of the heat of the moment like that. And I say, good, let's keep it that way. Put some physical distance. The moment that you feel like that you are having mental health concerns about depression and suicidality, you must put physical distance between you and your guns if you ever start to slide down that painful path of self-doubt about your future survival. You've got to have the courage to give up your guns to those people who can store them for you until you get treatment and you are stabilized. Another story with a bad ending. My elderly neighbor of mine told me about his adult son who had lived with his girlfriend, and they were in a two-story house, and their relationship had been going downhill, and they were fighting, and the son had a lot of guns. And one night at the end of a big argument, she said she was going to leave him, and he said, if you try to leave me, I'm going to go upstairs and shoot myself. And she said, with a sentence that I'm assuming she's going to regret for the rest of her life, you don't have the guts to kill yourself. Of course, you can guess the rest. He went upstairs and shot himself in their bedroom. So imagine these were her last words to him, and what he heard was, she doesn't think you'll do it. She thinks you're a coward. Go ahead, show her, call her bluff. And he went upstairs and shot himself. It's hard to follow his thinking in the light of the day. Did he think he needed to, quote, prove her wrong, or that he was, quote, man enough to kill himself? Did he think that by killing himself he would punish her for the rest of her life? Well, he certainly succeeded. Imagine her guilt and consider how his family still hates her for what she said. Certainly he had some major depression issues at the time of his suicide. Happy people with a lot to live for and hopes and goals and dreams and family connections don't usually kill themselves. Maybe he didn't know who to turn to. So let's consider the possibilities for how people can get help. Cops, veterans, civilians, everybody, you and me, how we can get help. One is that we have something called the Employee Assistance Program, EAP. Get the number for the Employee Assistance Program from your employer. Most employers have them. It is a counseling service. It's an 800 number. It's usually connected to the human resources function of your job. Get the telephone number and put it in your phone. EAP providers, and I've worked with a lot of them in my consulting work, do miracle work. They save people's lives and careers. They rescue people all the time. They work on suicide issues, depression, health issues, cancer, blended families, sick kids, gambling, drug, alcohol problems, legal issues, pet loss. I've used EAP myself. I've been to EAP counselor. I think they do miracle work. So you usually get 3 to 5 to 7 sessions for free. Any future sessions working with a therapist can be billed at a pay scale that you can afford. The value of using EAP clinician is, there are many. One is that it's confidential. No one in your organization is ever going to know. No one's ever going to know that you wanted to seek help. Human resources won't know. Your boss won't know. There's no trailing report. One of the most challenging things I do, especially when talking with employees or in a city or county, or employees in a private sector job, or cops, is they don't believe that the therapeutic discussion with a counselor about your personal or professional stressors is confidential. It is. The only time it's not confidential is when someone in a therapeutic relationship says, I want to kill myself or I want to kill somebody else. In that situation, the doctor or the clinician or the therapist has a duty to stop treatment and to get this person immediate mental health help. So when we look at the Employee Assistance Program discussion, with a therapist, it is confidential. There's no report. No one's ever going to see or know that you sought help. It is a confidential conversation. When you talk to other people, and sometimes it comes up in discussions with coworkers about the employee assistance program, oftentimes they throw it down. Oftentimes they have bad ideas about what it's all about. It's a free benefit and it's confidential. They will tell you that it's not confidential. Well, I went to grad school with these people. It's confidential. With these types of clinicians, you could hang them up by their thumbs for 2 weeks. They wouldn't tell you their own first name. EAP support for employees is one of those benefits that oftentimes people don't realize until it's really bad. When I think about the workplace violence cases that I've worked on, one of my first calls or resources or referrals to employees that are hurting personally and professionally is Employee Assistance Program. I like their work, and I think it's an untapped resource that you have as an employee benefit. So find out what they're all about. Look at it online if you can for your company. Get a brochure from Human Resources. Tell them it's for somebody else if you're embarrassed, but get that information. Sorry. Second choice besides the employee assistance program would be your medical provider, your personal physician. Your personal physician has seen more problems than you'll ever have. Reach out to your personal physician for a referral to a psychologist for therapy or for a psychiatrist for anti-anxiety or antidepressant medication. Most often, therapists, psychologists are for the cognitive behavioral part, and psychiatrists are there for the medication. Oftentimes, we may need both to stabilize our lives. Lastly, think about a faith-based counselor at your church. If you were able to get counseling through pastoral counseling in your church, a lot of pastors have had formal clinical training in these areas. Not every religious leader can do this, but you may be able to find somebody in your church or your church community who can be a good faith-based counselor. This is oftentimes very effective in situations where you may need marital counseling as well. They can work with your family and your spouse or partner. So I can't say this too strongly. If you're in a life situation where your family or your love relationships or your work relationships are so bad that you're losing or have lost hope, you have to get immediate mental health help, and that includes putting physical distance between you and your guns. Ask a trusted family member or friend to store your guns until you and they agree that you've stabilized. Don't be like those cops who looked down and saw the instrument of their own death clipped to their belts and took the wrong action. Everything can be fixed if you're around to fix it. Let's talk about the National Hotline for Suicide Prevention. It is 800-273-8255. So that is for veterans. You can get a cross referral to VA counselors. For the public, you can get a local referral to a mental health clinician through this telephone number. Again, 800-273-8255, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Okay, time for my favorite part of the show, the stupidest crook of the week. Crime Time's stupidest crook of the week is where I get to talk about some of our dumbest criminals who managed to get themselves arrested based on their monumental stupidity. This is a fun one for me. I don't know much of the details here, but I just saw it online and it made me laugh. A woman gave a waitress a $5,000 tip with her boyfriend's credit card to get some revenge back on him after they had fought. The meal cost $55 and she left. She got a 9,000% tip added on. The boyfriend called the cops and had his girlfriend arrested for credit card fraud. So they had some stuff going on in their relationship there. But for a brief moment, the waitress thought, I got a $5,000 tip based on a $55 lunch bill. So sorry she didn't get the $5,000, but yeah, you're not going to get a $9,000% tip. So that's our stupidest crook of the week. Let's test your Crime Time IQ with this week's crime quiz question. Okay. Here's the question. Where does the name sheriff come from? You see it painted on their cars. You see it on the building. You see sheriff's deputies in the courthouses. They run the jails, et cetera, et cetera. Where does the name sheriff come from? Well, it is a combination of two Old English words that came around in the year 1000 BC for the reeve, R-E-E-V-E, who was designated by the king to be the protector or the operator of the shire or the tax collector of the shire. So the shire reeve, or sheriff, that's how that phrase came. So the reeve of the shire, or the shire reeve, turned into sheriff, and that's where that phrase came from. Pretty cool, huh? Crime Time safety tip. Last week I talked about garage door remotes and how it's important not to leave your remote in the car because smart thieves can steal your car, and if your licenses or your registration or your insurance card has your address, they drive straight over to your house and break in while you're on the phone to the cops asking where your car is. Let's stay on the same theme about garages. and how it's important in the summer months now not to leave your garage door open and unattended for too long of a time. It's an easy habit to get into, something we all do. We start our weekends by opening the garage door in the early morning, and we come and go, and oftentimes it stays open all day and all night. We finally close it. Well, keeping your garage doors open is not a problem if you're coming and going and you're in your front yard and your kids or your spouse or partner is coming and going and you're going through the house and in the garage all day. But smart crooks can walk by or drive by, especially if they have a truck, and see a lot of stuff in your garage that they want to steal while you're inside watching TV or eating your lunch. They can walk away with or carry away or put into their car or truck a ton of stuff from your garage. Think of all the things you have inside your garage, your tools and power tools, gas cans full of gas, propane tanks, barbecues, bikes, mowers, weed whackers, yard equipment, farm equipment, furniture, fishing or hunting gear, even motorcycles or quads. All these things can be stolen out of your garage while you're inside. And you go, I was just in there for a minute. So the Crime Time safety tip of the week is if you are in your house and your garage door is open and you're not coming and going on a pretty regular basis, just close it and open it. This is particularly important if you have a house that people can see from the street. If you don't, it's less of a concern. But if folks walk by or bicycle by, and lots of crooks are on bikes, or come by in a truck and they look in and they see there's some cool stuff I want to steal, don't make it easy for them to do by leaving your garage door open all the time. I know it sounds like a hassle, but think how fast a crook can take something from your garage and be long gone. So thanks for listening to this episode of Crime Time. I encourage you to go to my website at crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email with some questions or topics you want me to cover on future shows. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Dr. Steve Albrecht, and follow me on Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht. Next week's show, I have my friend Mary Beth Wilkes Janke. She is an author of a new book called The Protector. It's about her time as a Secret Service agent. It's about her time working for the Department of State, protecting foreign dignitaries and also protecting the leadership in the Latin American country of Colombia. She's a psychologist and one of my closest, dearest friends in the psychology and threat assessment world. So we'll be talking about her book next week called The Protector. In our world, there are sheep and shepherds and wolves, and too many people are sheep and too few people are shepherds. There are a lot of wolves out there. There are not enough police officers or sheriff's deputies to protect us all. That means you need to be a shepherd. Take care of yourself and protect your family, protect your loved ones, your friends, your coworkers. Pay attention and be prepared to defend yourself with legal force if necessary. Be a good witness for the police if you see a crime. Stay safe and stay aware and stay alert at home, at work, at school, and even on the road. So thanks for listening to Crime Time. My thanks to Jim Wining, producer Matt, and all the good folks at Axe Media Group. I'm Steve Albrecht, and thanks for listening to what I know is right.